Hey to you all, welcome to Metric Hub. Today I'm going to give a revision on communication in 5, full paper revision. It's going to be a full paper revision, right? So paper 2 contains 100 marks. So we're going to revise a full paper, right? So I'm going straight to question 1, right? So let's revise together. Question 1. Indicate whether the following statements are true or false, right? True or false, by writing only true or false next to the question number, right? So let's go to question 1.1. Grapevine communication takes place in every workplace, right? Grapevine, right? Takes place in every workplace. So grapevine is an example or is a form of what? Informal communication. So apart from formal communication, you can find that within an organization, the informal communication also exists, right? An example of informal communication, which is what you call grapevine. So it takes place in every organization. That's true. In every organization, you can find that there is always informal communication, right? So the answer is true. Is true, right? Let's go to 1.2. 1.2. 1.2, right? Marketing involves creating customer demand for a product or a service, right? When you are doing marketing, you are creating a demand for your product, right? So that you can be able to increase sales. So the answer is true. The answer is true, right? Let's go to question 1.3. 1.3. 1.3. 1.3, right? Informal communication may become part of a binding legal document. That's a false statement. An informal communication cannot become a binding legal document because it's informal, because it's an informal communication. So the answer is false. The answer is false. Let's go to 1.4. Right. Laissez-faire managers are task-oriented. That's false. That's false. Remember, laissez-faire, whereby the manager only delegates tasks and individuals will go and perform the task, right? Right. That's what we call laissez-faire leadership style, whereby the manager just delegates tasks to be done. Right. It is now up to the employee to decide on how to do or to carry out the task. Right. So that's a false statement. Laissez-faire managers are not task oriented. Right. Let's go to 1.6, 1.5, 1.5. WhatsApp messages can be classified as print media. That's false. That's false. Print media is something that is in print, and WhatsApp message cannot be considered something that has been printed, right? Let's go to 1.6. 1.6, right? Vertical and horizontal communication takes place during effective briefing. That's a true statement. That's a true statement, right? When we're talking about vertical communication, we're talking about upwards and downwards communication, right? Whereby communication takes place from the employee to the higher level management, and also from the higher level management, which is maybe the supervisor or the manager, to the lower level management, which are the employees, right? And also horizontal communication takes place whereby employees in the same level, they are communicating, right, with each other. And let's go to 1.7. 1.7. Confidentiality is the ability to keep formal and informal information private. Confidentiality. When you are observing what you call confidentiality, mean to say you are keeping information Either it is a formal information or informal private. Right, let's go to 1.8. 1.8. All cultures conduct business in the same way. That is true. That is true. Business is done in the same way, right? Despite the cultures, right? Right. Let's go to 1.9. Proficiency refers to the way in which we use personal space to communicate. That's a false statement, right? When you are using personal zone space to communicate, that's what you call proxemics. Proxemics, right? So that's false. It's a false statement. Proxemics, that's when you communicate using what? Personal space. Right. Let's go to 1.19, 1.19, 1.19, 1.10, sorry. Right. Our briefs shape our attitudes, and our beliefs shape our attitudes, and our attitude shapes our behavior. That's a true statement. That's a true statement. What we believe in shapes our what? It shapes our attitude, and our attitudes shape our behavior. Right. Let's move on to the last question. Right. Aggressive behavior shows a readiness to attack or to start a fight. That's a true statement. When you are being aggressive, it shows that when you want to start a fight or you want to attack, you cannot be aggressive. You show aggressive behavior and then you do not want to attack. So that's a true statement. Aggressive behavior shows a readiness to attack or to start a fight. That's a true statement. Right. Let's go to question 2. Question 2. Question 2. Question 2. Right. Give one term for each of the following intervention method by choosing a term from the list given below. Write only the term next to the question number, right? So here we're going to write the term next to the question number. Our question number is 2.1. 2.1, right? So then let's read 2.1. The employer confronts the employee about his or her problematic behavior and guides the employee towards a solution. That's what we call a disciplinary hearing. A disciplinary hearing. That's what we call a disciplinary hearing or interview. A disciplinary hearing or an interview. When a manager or an employee, the higher level employee confronts a lower level employee about his behavior. Let's go to 2.2. Right. An external specialist, such as a psychologist, guides employees to finding their own solution. That's what you call consultation. 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 When a specialist who is not working within an organization, we call it an external specialist, right? Who come in and guides employees to find solution. That's what we call consultation. Consultation, right? So let's go to 2.3. Offers and counter offers are exchanged until a mutual agreement is shared, which is acceptable to both parties or both conflicting parties. That's what you call bargaining. Bargaining, right? When bargaining is taking place, you can find that there are offers that are put in place and counter offers, right? Right. Let's move on to Question 2.4, 2.4, 2.4, 2.4, 2.4. Right. A third-party moderator facilitates an agreement between the employer and the employee, but does not make the final decision. That's what you call mediation. A mediator does not give a final decision. A mediator does not give a final decision. Rather, he will create a social environment whereby both parties are able to, to reach an agreement. So he listens to both parties and provides solutions, right? Applicable or acceptable to both parties, right? So it is up to the two parties to make a decision, to choose which possible solution will work for both, right? Let's go to 2.5. 2.5. 2.5. When an employee and his or her employer cannot reach a decision or a solution, they submit their dispute to a third party who makes the final decision, right? That's what you call arbitration. That is what you call arbitration. Arbitration. When a third party is introduced to give a final and binding decision. That's what you call arbitration. Arbitration, right? Let's move on to question 3. Question 3. Yeah, we are on question 3. Question 3. Question 3. Right. Question 3. Question 3. So let's move, let's read the statement. Give one term for each of the following time control techniques by choosing a term from the list below. Write only the term next to the question number. So we are on 3.1. 3.1, right? A dash is placed on a wall to provide a broad overview of the year, month, or week ahead. That's what you call a wall chart. A wall chart. A wall chart. That's what you call a wall chart. A wall chart. The one that can be placed on a wall. That's a wall chart. So let's go to 3.2. A dash is a portable book or e-device that allows a person to schedule and record his or her daily task in detail. That's what you call a diary. A diary. So a diary has dates and time, right? So a diary here is arranged in such a way that it will spread from January to December, from 8 o'clock to 5 o'clock, right? Let's move on to 3.3. 3.3, right? Dash involves making intensive effort to adhere to a schedule and complete all tasks well and on time. That's what you call a self-control. A self-control whereby you schedule a task and when to complete the task. That's what you call self-control. Self-control technique. That's what you call a self-control technique. Right. Okay. Let's move on to question 4. Question 4. To question 4. Right. Question 4. Right. Choose a description from column B that matches a factor in column A, which gives rise to unsuccessful communication. Write only the letter A to D next to the question number. So let's go to 4.1. 4.1. 4.1. Right. Prejudice. Right. When prejudice, it is when you judge a person without a proper research about the person. That's what you call prejudice. You judge before you gather information or before you do a research, right? That's what you call prejudice. So let's look for the correct answer. Right. Making an opinion usually negative towards members of a group based solely on their membership of that group and too little information or knowledge, e.g., all taxi drivers are bad drivers, right? So the answer is D. 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 Right. Let's go to 4.2. 4.2. Ethnocentricity. And ethnocentricity is when you consider your culture to be more superior than other culture. When you feel that your culture is more superior than other culture, you are an ethnocentric, right? So let's choose the correct answer, right? Judging other cultures according to the values and norms of your own culture, e.g., it is bad manners to take a seat without being invited to do so, right? That's a C, a C, right? Let's go to 4.3, stereotyping. Stereotyping is when you over generalizing a certain group of people, right? When you over generalize a certain group of people, that's what you call stereotyping, right? So let's look for the correct answer, right? Attributing a single characteristics to a particular person simply because he or she belongs to a certain group, e.g., that woman must be a bad driver because all women are bad drivers. That's A. The answer is A. Let's go to 4.4. Discrimination. Right. When you discriminate, it means that you are treating other people unfairly based on maybe their sexuality, based on their gender, based on their occupation, or maybe on their culture. Discrimination, right? Based on their race, right? Right. So let's choose the correct answer, which is B. Which is B. Treating people unfairly based on perceived differences, e.g., let's not help homeless people because they fail at everything, just judging, right? That's what you call discrimination. You're discriminating them because you feel like you feel like they have lost everything, right? So let's move on. Let's move on to question 5. Question 5. Question 5. Question 5. Let's move on to question 5. Right. Question 5. Right. Read the scenario below and answer the question. Right. Kedrick has been the specialist at Callis Coulter for 5 months. Janet, the previous receptionist, was promoted to the position of PA to the manager. Kali Tamram, right? Cedric overheard Janet tell her friend on the phone that Cedric was hired for his good looks and does not take gossip seriously. When Miss Tamren calls Cedric to her office and ask if Cedric would model the new men's range at their new show, Cedric begins to wonder if Janet was right about his good looks. As a PA, Janet suggests that Cedric respond to Miss Tamran's question after 3 days. Right. So let's go to question 5.1. 5.1. 5.1. Right. Indicating whether the following statements are true or false by writing true or false next to the question number. Right. Question 5.5. 5.11. Question 5.11. Right. In the scenario, Janet and Miss Tamra's statement of Frederick is ethical. Right. Is it ethical for Mr. Tamran to say this about Cedric? That's not ethical. Right. False. False. It's not ethical. That's false. Right. Let's go to 5.12. In the scenario, Cedric's refusal to model the men's clothes is ethical. That's true. That's true. Right. Let's go to 5.13. Janet PA addressing Cedric's receptionist is an example of horizontal communication. That's true. That's true. They are at the same level. They are at the same level. Right. Let's move on to question 5.5. Question 5.2. 5.2. Right. Define informal communication. Right. Informal communication is communication which takes place outside the formal communication. Right. It takes place within the organization, but outside the formal communication. Right. So the question has 3 marks. Right. So you're going to define, right, and also give examples. Right. So 5.1. It is communication which takes place outside the formal communication channel. The formal communication channel. Right. Within an organization. Within an organization. Or you can say within a workplace. Right. And then examples. Can give an example of informal communication. Right. Examples includes gossips. Examples includes gossips. E.g. gossips. E.g. rumors. E.g. grapevine. Those are examples of what? Of informal communication. Right. Okay, let's move on to question 5.3. 5.3. Question 5.3. 5.3. Right. Quote an example of informal communication from the above. Right. When Cedric overheard, when Cedric overheard Jenny tell her friend on the phone that Frederick was hired for his good looks. Right. That's the answer. That's the answer. Right. 5.1. 5.1. 5 point answer for 5.3. Right. Let's go to 5.4. 5.4. Describe the one advantage of the informal communication reflected in the scenario. Right. Advantage is Frederick could know or realize that he was hired for. It made Frederick to realize that he was hired for his good looks. He was hired for his good looks. Right. So he realized it on grapevine as a channel of informal communication. Right. Let's move on to 5.5. 5.5. 5.5. Quote an example of downward communication and upward communication from the scenario. An advantage of, that's what we call a vertical communication, that we have vertical downwards and vertical upwards, right? So let's talk about upwards communication, or let's start with downwards communication. Downwards communication is communication from a higher level to a lower level, right? When top management is are communicating with lower level management, that's what we call a downwards, right? A downwards communication. When a higher level management communicates with a lower level management. That's what we call a downward communication, right? So let's check where downward communication took place, right? Our answer, what? So downward took place when Miss Tamran calls Frederick to his office. That's what you call downwards communication. And then upwards communication. Upwards communication. Right. Right. Upwards communication. Right. Here you can find that upward communication, it is when Cedric, that's Cedric, not Cedric. Right. When Cedric denies when he denies the offer, when he refuses to model. That's upwards communications. Feedback, normally it is done when employees or lower level management is giving employees instructions, when the lower level management is giving feedback to the higher level management. Right. Let's move on to question 6. 6.1. 6.1. 6.1. 6.1. What does it say? They say tabulate the differences between aims and objectives. So when the statement is asking you to tabulate, it means that we are supposed to give to compare, to do comparison by drawing a table like this. Unfortunately, my table is very ugly. Let me try again. So we're supposed to put a table like this and then do the comparison. I tried. Right. So let's tabulate. Let's give this differences between aims and objectives. Right. Aims, objectives. Right. So aims are normally long-term plans or intentions. These are what you call long-term plans. And then objectives are short-term plans. They are short-term plans. For example, I will say, in future, I want to do medical secretary as a diploma. That's an aim. And then objectives, I'll say, by June 2026, I'll be having a N5 certificate for medical secretary, right? So another difference is aims are general. They are general statements. Whereas objectives are concrete. They are concrete statements. And you can find that aims are not specific, whereas objectives are specific. Are specific. Right. And then you can find that aims are not time framed. Aims are not time framed. I want to have a diploma. That's an aim. Whereas objectives are time framed. By 2028, I'll be having a diploma in medical secretary, or I'll be having a diploma in secretarial management. Right. Let's move on to the way how to measure. You can find that aims are not easily measured. Cannot easily measured. But objectives can be measured easily. Can be measured easily. Can be measured easily. Right. Let's go to 6.2. Right. 6.2. Explain how to practice self-control. Right. How to practice self-control. 6.2. 6.2. How to practice self-control. Right. How to practice one has to use time control. One has to use time control. Use time control techniques. One has to prioritizing task. You need to prioritize tasks. You start with the most important to the least important task, right? And we are supposed to make sure that you identify time wasters. You need to identify time wasters, right? One has to work on one task, at a time. One has to work at one task at a time, right? And also, you can find that one has to evaluate how time was spent. Evaluate how time was spent on each task. Right? And also, one has supposed not to procrastinate. One has not to procrastinate. Never avoid doing the task. So the question requires us to have 2 marks. So I've given many of them. So let's go to 6.3. Define delegation. Define delegation. 6.3. Right. So delegation is all about assigning tasks or duties to lower level management. So the question has how many marks? 1 mark. So you don't need to explain much. Just say it is a process of assigning tasks to employees. Right. When you're assigning tasks and duties, or duties to the employees. You are delegating. Right. Let's move on to question 7. Question 7, which is mass communication. Right. Name 4 functions of mass media. Question 7, 1.7. Question 7. Question 7. Right. 7.1. Right. So, functions of mass media. Functions of mass media is to inform, to inform, to interpret news, three, to educate, four, to entertain, five, to advertise, six, to persuade, and lastly, to render a service. To render a service. To render a service by providing information. Right. So these are the functions of what? Of communication. Right. Let's move on to 7.2. Define advertising. Advertising. The question wants us to define, and there are 2 marks. So you just have to give a definition. Which is 7.2. 7.2. 7.2. Right. So advertising, it is pre-planned, oral, prepaid, as it is defined as a pre-planned, paid, oral communication, oral conversation, right? Whereby an identified sponsor so his services, his products and services. A pre-planned paid oral conversation whereby an identified sponsor sells his products and services, and it can also be an opinion. All right. Good. So let's go to 7.2, 7.4, sorry, 7.4. 7.3, sorry. Name 2 disadvantages of a news as mass media. Newspaper. What are the disadvantages of a newspaper? Right. 4.3. Disadvantages of a newspaper. You can find that let's go to the question. Disadvantages of a newspaper. Right. Name 2 disadvantages of a newspaper. So we're going to give disadvantages of using mass media. All right, an example of mass media, which is a newspaper. Right. So one of the disadvantages is that it can go stale easily. Ne? It can go stale easily. All right. And then, so meaning to say information becomes old news, right? Very fast. Information becomes old news. Information becomes old very fast. Meaning to say if you buy last week newspaper, the information is already stale. It's no longer fresh information, right? And also people would not read, cannot be able to read the newspaper, right? And also another disadvantage is that they are easily discarded. Easily discarded. They are easily discarded. Right. So let's move on to question 7.4. Question 7.4. Name 2 disadvantages of a newspaper. We did. So let's go to 7.5. While job hunting, Cedric found the following advertising advertisement in the classified section of a local newspaper. Receptionist required. Start immediately. 3 years experience needed. Email to Tian. Right. So let's go to question. Discuss how to amend the advertisement for it to achieve the following criteria. IDA formula. So how can you amend it so that it can get attention? Attention. How can you amend it so that it can receive attention? Attention. Right. You're supposed to make sure that you put the company name or a logo on top. Right. It can also be amended by put a vacancy heading. As well as example from student. Right, you should give an example. Right. Let's go to 5.1. 5.1. Sorry, 7.52. 7.52. Right. How to mend it? How to mend the advertisement to move to action? How can you mend it to move to action so that people who respond to act? All right. So by 1, you can give an email address for Tian. Two, you can also put a starting date. Three, you can also put a company name. Right. Let's go to 7.6. 7.6. Right. What is the full word for XP? Right. XP simply means what? Experience. For example, here 3 years. XP, which is experience. It's a shortcut for experience. Right. Let's go to 7.7. Name the purpose of advertising being fulfilled by this advertisement. Name the purpose. So here, they want to inform the public, right, or to persuade the applicants to, they want to persuade the applicants to apply for information, and also persuade applicants with the correct, or with the requirements to apply, right? So let's go to question 7.8. Name 3 additional requirements for effective advertisement. Right. Additional requirements for effective advertisement includes: one has to know the product and service. Knowledge of the product. Knowledge of the product. And services. And also knowledge of the target market. Knowledge of the target market. Which market are you targeting? Right. And also knowledge of the objectives of the company. One has to have knowledge of the psychological needs of potential customers or clients or consumers. Right. So let's move on to question 8. Question 8. Presentation, communication. Presentation, communication. Question 8. Question 8. Right. Read the scenario below and answer the questions. Imagine that 15 years from now, the TVET college that you'll be graduating from wants to give you an award for being the best employer among new graduates. You'd receive the award at a graduation ceremony. In your 4-minute acceptance speech, you would want to thank the college staff for their encouragement and hard work. And sorry, you would also want to motivate the new graduates to continue improving themselves and pursuing their interests with commitment. The ceremony will take place in the biggest hall of the college. Right. Right. So let's go to 8.1. Name the occasion. Right. So here is the graduation ceremony. The graduation ceremony. The graduation ceremony. It's a graduation ceremony. What's the occasion? Right. Let's go to 8.2. Would this be a good platform to promote your business? Yes or no? Substitute your answer. Right. It is not a good platform to do so. Here you are supposed to focus on children's graduation success. Right. The focus is on the graduation. It's not a platform to advertise your products or to promote your products. Right? 8.3, describe the target market. Target market are those people that you need to keep in mind when you are giving your 4-minute acceptance speech. So the target market are the students, two, college staff, three, lecturers, and new graduates. New graduates. New graduates. And then let's go to 8.4. Describe the purpose of your speech. So here you are told to what? Let's go back. In your 4-minute acceptance speech, you would want to thank the what? The college for the encouragement. You also would want to motivate, you want to motivate the new candidates, right? Right. So the purpose of your speech is to motivate. You also want to thank college staff, and also you are accepting an award. Right, let's move on to 8.5. 8.5. Name the type of speech you would be making, right? You are going to make in what? Let's go to scenario. Right, it says, in your 4-minute acceptance speech. So you are going to make what? An acceptance speech. An acceptance speech. acceptance speech. Right. Let's move on to 8.6. Name the venue where the speech would take place. Right, let's go back to the scenario. We're saying the ceremony would take place in the biggest hall of the college. Right. So it takes place in the biggest hall of the college. In the biggest hall of the college. That's the answer. In the biggest hall of the college. So let's move on to 8.7. 8.7. Right. Describe two aspects of the venue that you should check before preparing your speech. Right. So the aspects of the venue that you need to consider before preparing the speech, when you're supposed to consider the physical environment. Physical environment. Whether it is noisy, is it a noisy environment? Right. E.g., noisy. Is it a noisy environment? Right. And then 2, check the space. Check space of the audience. Is there enough space? Right. Also have to check the possibility of using visual aids. Is it possible to use visual aids? Right. And lastly, you need to check the functioning of the public address system. The functioning of the public address system. So let's move on to question 8.8, which is the last question. 8.8. Right. Name 2 guidelines that the college staff should follow during interpersonal communication with a guest speaker. You need to greet the speaker politely. Greet the speaker politely. 2, you're supposed to give the speaker full attention. Give the speaker full attention. 3, you're supposed to listen to the speaker. Listen to the speaker. 4. Do not interrupt the speaker. Do not interrupt the speaker. And also accept compliments gracefully. You need to accept compliments gracefully. And lastly, offer prompt assistance. Offer prompt assistance. So that's it. Thank you so much for tuning in. Right. Please don't forget to subscribe if you are here for the first time. Please like the video and comment. Have a good day.